I don't know about you, but this may have been one of the most fun NFL off seasons that I've ever been a part of. And with one of the most deep and dynamic free agent classes that we've ever seen, it brought a whole lot of shock and a whole lot of breaking news. But now that those free agents are officially signing deals with their new teams, it's time to talk about who are the winners, who are the losers, and who is just a downright bust. With so many big names changing teams over the first couple of days of the tampering period, NFL fans are already buzzing about the NFL season. And I had a blast covering all the moves with our breaking news videos that we were posting as the action was happening. But those were just instant reaction videos. Now we've had a chance to see things settle down a little bit, and we can give you a little bit more of an accurate response to some of these moves. And that's what we're going to talk about today, trying to figure out who the big winners were, who the big losers were, and there was a couple of guys that, in my opinion, was just a big bust. But I think it's prudent that we start with probably the most impactful signing of everybody, Kirk Cousins to Atlanta. This deal for Atlanta is exactly what they needed. They've had a lot of instability at the quarterback position. Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, neither of them were the answer. And over the last few years, they have given up 3 first-round picks towards their offense with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson. Now, maybe it was the coaching staff that didn't utilize them properly, but the quarterback position was no help either. Kirk Cousins landing in Atlanta is the perfect fit, and he is going to give an opportunity for these first-round picks to finally find their footing and hopefully have the breakouts that they all deserve. So for me, this move for the Atlanta Falcons is going to be a B+. Now, I would have gone with an A-. However, he is coming off a pretty significant injury, and I'm sure Atlanta did their vetting. Kirk Cousins went through his physical, and everything should end up being fine. They wouldn't have spent the money if he wasn't going to be, but you never know with these things, and that's why I'm going to go with a B+ instead of jumping up to an A. Calvin Ridley got a massive deal with the Tennessee Titans, and me personally, I don't love it. Now, from a standpoint of just pure football, it makes sense. And I do like it for the potential help that it gives Will Levis to continue to grow and become the quarterback that was talked about being drafted towards the beginning of the first round instead of sliding all the way to the second last year. And he's going to need weapons around him. DeAndre Hopkins will be in Tennessee for another year. Calvin Ridley is going to give them that big, deep threat that they have needed. But the run game is something we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. This is a whole lot of money to spend on a guy that has missed a lot of football over the last couple of years, and this past season was very inconsistent. And that might not be completely his fault. Some of it could have been on Jacksonville. Now, the reason that I'm giving this move a C is because this is an awful lot of money to give up to Calvin Ridley. And in hindsight, the last staff could have just kept A.J. Brown and paid him the money instead, and he is a much better wide receiver than what Calvin Ridley is. And like I mentioned, I know that was old coaches, old front office, everything like that. This is a new regime here, and they're trying to give Will Levis everything that he needs to be successful. To me, it just felt like they were trying to make up for a mistake that was made a couple of years ago instead of looking to the future. The Green Bay Packers signing Josh Jacobs, let me check my notes, was seen by absolutely nobody. A complete shock to really everybody in the industry. And he's not going to have as high as a grade as you would think here, because I do feel like it was kind of an unnecessary move, but I understand why as well. Josh Jacobs will be a little bit more of a consistent upgrade over Aaron Jones. Jones has dealt with some injury issues over the course of his NFL career, but we know that he offers a pretty big upside any given week when he is on the field. But I also believe the Packers are looking for a running back that they can feed the ball to 20 to 25 times a game and allow him to just run through the tackles. And Aaron Jones really doesn't fit that description. On the ground, he's a 15 to 20 carry guy, and then he also makes a little bit of an impact in the passing game. Jacobs is going to give him some stability from that standpoint that maybe Aaron Jones, they just didn't feel comfortable enough with. But Aaron Jones was still a very dynamic playmaker, and there were some guys that you could have signed to pair with him to have a really good 1-2 punch in the backfield. That's why Josh Jacobs to the Green Bay Packers is getting a B- from me, because it really felt like it was a little bit of splurging when they didn't need to. But the one good thing that comes out of this, Aaron Jones was released, and he goes to Minnesota. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. So now we don't have to worry about a committee in Green Bay. It's Josh Jacobs' backfield to himself. After agreeing to terms with Kirk Cousins, the Atlanta Falcons decided to add another wide receiver weapon by bringing in Darnell Mooney. And Darnell Mooney did some really good things while he was in Chicago. He also did some unforgettable things, and he dealt with some injuries. So this signing is definitely a little bit more of a depth signing for Atlanta. They need a strong wide receiver too, somebody behind Drake London, but I don't think they're going to be done making moves at the wide receiver position just yet. This is a very deep wide receiver class, and you've got tons of weapons already on that team. But the contract is what is very strange to me. That was a lot of money to a guy that really doesn't feel like he's earned it. So Darnell Mooney to the Atlanta Falcons is only going to be a C+ for me. I don't see him making a whole lot of an impact. Drake London and Kyle Pitts will be the first guys up in the passing game. Bijan Robinson will get his mix as well, and maybe Darnell Mooney will pop up every once in a while. Unfortunately, I find myself being a Gabe Davis truther on a consistent basis, and it hasn't really worked out consistently either. Gabe Davis is either going to have those game-winning weeks or you're going to hate yourself for starting him. There's no in-between with Gabe Davis. But I do feel like his signing in Jacksonville is absolutely perfect. And I'm not saying that this signing makes Gabe Davis more consistent or fantasy viable. More than likely, he's still going to be like a best ball grab that's still going to have some big weeks in that offense. But what it does do is it gives him the speedster on the outside to stretch the field, which will open up the middle of the field for Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram to eat once again. And Gabe Davis, being the type of player he is, he's not going to command a huge target share. Calvin Ridley last year did. Gabe Davis will not, while doing some of the things that we need to spread the defense apart and give these other guys some huge fantasy upside. That's why Gabe Davis to Jacksonville is an A- for me. Not for what it does for Gabe Davis, but what it does for the rest of the offense. We knew that Saquon Barkley was going to end up hitting the free agent market. There was no way the New York Giants were going to try and tag him again. But going to the division rival Philadelphia Eagles, I don't think anybody really anticipated that until it started to come out on the first day of the tampering period. The whole state of Texas was rooting for Saquon Barkley. The Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans both thought would be really good fits for the running back, but he stays up east with the Eagles instead. And this definitely felt like a splurge to me. You had DeAndre Swift last season who did just fine, and you weren't going to re-sign him. We knew that he was probably gone from Philadelphia, but this is a whole lot of money to Saquon Barkley for a team that is really, really good already. And from a fantasy standpoint, you take a look at this signing and it feels really good deep down in the loins to begin with, right? Saquon Barkley, a top-tier running back in an offense that has weapons spreading the defense out all over the place, and a pretty good offensive line should equal a ton of fantasy points. But I think we need to be very cautious with what we believe the ceiling to be with Barkley, because his work in the passing game, I feel like, is really going to disappear. You've got three really good targets in A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert that should see more targets than Saquon Barkley. And we already know that Jalen Hurts is going to steal some of those goal line touchdowns as well. So while he should see plenty of yards and plenty of carries on the ground that give him a really safe floor, the touchdowns and the receiving work that would give him a super high upside probably will not end up being there. So I like the fit enough to give it a B-, but I really can't go a whole lot higher than that because I feel like expectations for Saquon Barkley will be higher than what they should be. You're going to be asking yourself, Kyle, why did you change your clothes in the middle of this video? And it's actually a funny story because this video is actually done and edited and set to release on Saturday. But then Justin Fields was traded from the Chicago Bears to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I had to redo the DeAndre Swift section because I talked about Justin Fields. And the last thing I needed was everybody commenting and saying, you know Fields was traded, right? And that Lions hoodie that you saw me wearing at the beginning of the video is now in the washer. And instead of sitting here in wet clothes, trying to record this real quick so our fabulous editor Taylor can get it done and out for Sunday, I figured I would just stay in what I was wearing anyway. But I will admit, my grade for the DeAndre Swift signing was actually lower prior to Justin Fields being traded. Now that he's actually been traded, I'm willing to bump up that grade a little bit. Because if for some reason the Chicago Bears decided to stick with Justin Fields, I really thought this would hurt DeAndre Swift. And from a fantasy perspective, really wouldn't give you a whole lot of value with him. But now that Justin Fields has been traded, he's not going to eat away at some of the value that DeAndre Swift would have ended up having. So he's going to be a little bit more consistent with touches on the ground because Justin Fields carried the ball way more than what Caleb Williams will end up carrying it. And while there might be some option stuff mixed in, because Caleb Williams can do well with that, it's not going to be like what we saw with Justin Fields. Here's my biggest gripe about signing DeAndre Swift. The guaranteed money in the contract was a little on the excessive side, I thought, when they could have signed somebody like an A.J. Dillon, or even they could have gone with a guy like Zach Moss potentially before he signed with the Cincinnati Bengals. And adding a power running back like that to Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson felt like it could give you a lot of the same production as what DeAndre Swift would give you on his own. And knowing that DeAndre Swift dealt with a lot of injury issues prior to landing in Philly last year, you're not really getting like a model of health that you'll be able to rely on a consistent basis. So again, it's not like I hate DeAndre Swift, and it's not like I really hate this signing for the Bears. I just felt like they were kind of tossing money out there just to do it, instead of potentially using that money towards potentially an offensive lineman or something else to be able to help this team get better. Where with the running game, I don't know if DeAndre Swift is the biggest impact needed by the Bears to become a division-winning team. But with that being said, my original grade for this signing was going to be a C, but I'm going to go ahead and bump it up to a B-, knowing that DeAndre Swift is not going to be missing any touches for Justin Fields now, and that he should be getting a little bit larger of a workload. I'd like to give it a higher grade, but once again, the reason that I'm just not loving this one is because I do think that Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, and one of those bigger backs could have given you really good production, and you wouldn't have to have spent nearly as much money. For as little sense as DeAndre Swift to Chicago made for me, Tony Pollard to Tennessee didn't make any sense whatsoever. Because you already have a running back there that is very similar to Tony Pollard. And we saw last year that running Tony Pollard in between the tackles 15 times a game is not his game. So signing him to fill a role that is being vacated by Derrick Henry, to me, made absolutely no sense whatsoever. It just feels like Tennessee is spending money to spend money this offseason. And sometimes that's okay, especially considering you have Will Levis right now on his rookie contract. You can sign some players to bigger deals and get away with it if Will Levis ends up being your starter over the next few years. But from a fantasy standpoint, I just don't see Tony Pollard matching any type of numbers that he put up while he was in Dallas, when there was better offensive weapons around him, when there was a better offensive line, and there was a more established quarterback. And say what you will about Dak Prescott, but the dude put up numbers in the regular season. And that should have been enough for Tony Pollard to really find open spaces, and he couldn't do it because of how he was utilized. And now in Tennessee, it feels like he's going to be utilized the same way. So this grade from me is going to be a D, because Tony Pollard to Tennessee made absolutely no sense, because the running back role that they were looking for, or should have been anyway, is not best fit by Tony Pollard. The New York Giants bringing in Devin Singletary felt like a really good signing to me. They don't spend the money at the running back position trying to bring back Saquon Barkley, and they get a pretty decent bargain on a guy that played very well last season. And the New York Giants, they have to try and figure out a way to save money on all these other positions right now, because y'all screwed up and gave that big contract to Daniel Jones last year. But Devin Singletary has never been exciting in his career, but he's been pretty stable both with Buffalo and with the Houston Texans, and he's going to bring some stability to that backfield for the New York Giants as well. I don't see him being a top fantasy producer at all, but I definitely could see this guy being an okay flex option that we pick up much later in our drafts, that we can run out there on bye weeks or if we have injuries, and I do feel like it's a pretty decent fit. So with the New York Giants and Devin Singletary, I'm going to give this a B+, because I feel like the New York Giants actually did this one correctly. Derrick Henry to Baltimore felt like it was happening from the very moment that Derrick Henry gave that speech to the Tennessee crowd, thanking them for his time in Tennessee. And ever since then, it's been like, he's probably going to go to the Ravens. And look what happened. And this is a fantastic signing by the Baltimore Ravens. It's only a 2-year deal. It's not a ton of guaranteed money. And it's exactly the stability in the backfield that you need that has been lacking over the last couple of years. With constant injuries to J.K. Dobbins, with a guy like Justice Hill needing to be featured, Gus Edwards being very up and down with his performances, and of course being hurt as well. And you've brought in guys like Devontae Freeman, Melvin Gordon. I mean, the list goes on of the amount of guys that you've brought in trying to find some sort of stability and success at the running back spot. And guess what? Derrick Henry is going to do all of that for you. He is going to replace all of those guys and give you much better and consistent production. Derrick Henry, he's not done yet. He has plenty left in the tank. Last year in Tennessee, he still fared very well. He was a top 10 fantasy running back on a team that didn't have a whole lot of explosiveness, that lacked a lot of playmakers outside of DeAndre Hopkins, had a rookie quarterback coming in towards the end of the season after Ryan Tannehill couldn't get it done, and just overall the offense being very lackluster. But now he's going to be running behind a very solid offensive line with one of the most dynamic quarterbacks at the NFL level, coming off of an MVP season that has tons of weapons around him as well right now. Some of y'all are just going to hate this signing to hate on it, and that's fine. You're more than welcome to. But you're not going to do anything to convince me that Derrick Henry to the Baltimore Ravens is not a solid A+ and does a whole lot of good, not only from a real football standpoint, but from a fantasy standpoint as well. Antonio Gibson leaves Washington and heads to New England, where he'll likely be backing up Ramondre Stevenson. And this isn't that bad of a deal. It is for 3 years, but it's not a ton of money for Antonio Gibson to help put somebody behind Ramondre Stevenson that isn't necessarily a big-time back that's going to take a bunch of touches away from Ramondre Stevenson. This signing to me signifies, hey, we want to give Stevenson help, but he's still going to be the guy. And Gibson is the type of back that you can put back there in any type of situation, and he's not really going to alert the defense to what's going on. He could carry the football, and he could also catch it out of the backfield. So I think this is a good fit overall for this New England Patriots team. And I think it's perfect for those of you that want to invest in Ramondre Stevenson once again, who was very, very good over the last 4 games last year before going down with his injury. Antonio Gibson to me does not bring any fantasy value, but I'm still going to give this a grade of a B-, because while it does potentially take away a few snaps from Ramondre Stevenson, especially in pass catching situations, it's not the type of player that's going to steal his job completely, meaning Ramondre Stevenson should be a good bet heading into 2024. The Vikings are almost surely moving up for a quarterback. They just added another first-round pick this year to give them the ammunition that they will need. But signing Sam Darnold to a 1-year deal is a huge win in my opinion, especially for those of you that are invested in Justin Jefferson or Jordan Addison. Because depending on who they draft, Sam Darnold could end up being the starter to begin with. And that's okay, because Sam Darnold, I don't believe, is going to give us huge fantasy upside, or at least the fantasy upside that we saw from Kirk Cousins, but he's still a pretty big upgrade over the guys that were trying to be the quarterback last year. So Sam Darnold will bring that stability that we need for Jefferson, for Addison, and even the newly signed Aaron Jones. But he will also be a fantastic backup in case the rookie that comes in either struggles right away and they have to switch things up, or potentially misses time with an injury. Sam Darnold is an A- to Minnesota for me. Gardner Minshew to Las Vegas feels like a big win for me as well. He made Michael Pittman fantasy viable all year last year after the Anthony Richardson injury. So going to the Las Vegas Raiders, if they end up adding a rookie quarterback, that's okay. And if they don't, that's also okay, because Gardner Minshew probably will end up being the starter to begin with and should be a guy that can give Devontae Adams some more consistency than what Aiden O'Connell or Jimmy Garoppolo did last year. And it also helps push Aiden O'Connell a little bit as well. And if for some reason O'Connell wins the job to start but just can't get it done, Gardner Minshew will come in to save the day. This is a big A- for me, not just from a fantasy standpoint, but I feel like Gardner Minshew in Las Vegas just feels right. Austin Ekeler to the Washington Commanders was also another signing that I was not anticipating, and I don't love it either. For the main reason of, we know that Austin Ekeler was not going to be a guy that would go out and take a starting role like we saw with the Chargers over the last couple of years. So we already felt like losing fantasy viability was going to happen. But then he goes to Washington, where they have some decent pass catching weapons on the outside, but they also had a running back that had a really good season in 2023. And that's where this gets frustrating with me, because Brian Robinson had a good year last year, but was still hampered by giving up touches at times to Antonio Gibson, and also not the best game planning from Washington. Now, a new coaching staff hopefully will help with that. But Austin Ekeler is definitely going to take more touches away from him than what Antonio Gibson did. So to me, this feels much more like a 50-50 split. And while Austin Ekeler might be a decent complement to Brian Robinson, I also don't feel like his passing game work will be as good as we would like it to be. But of course, that depends on who Washington goes with at number 2 at the quarterback position. Ekeler could end up seeing a few dump-offs and Brian Robinson getting the rest of that workload on the ground. But Austin Ekeler, for as many touches as he might get through the air, I don't think he's going to get the touchdowns that we were used to in LA. For as much work as Brian Robinson will get on the ground, Austin Ekeler could steal some goal line touches, but also is going to steal a lot of that passing game work. These two are really going to take the fantasy performances down for one another this year, and that's why this is a C+ signing for me. Zach Moss to Cincinnati is a good fit, and I think Joe Mixon getting out of Cincinnati, honestly, is not that bad of an idea either. It's kind of felt like for a couple of years now that Cincinnati wanted to move on from Joe Mixon. And even though he was still there and he was paid to stay there, it just didn't feel like the type of relationship that Joe Mixon was going to thrive in. He's been very good at times. He's also been bad at times as well, but he finds himself in a much better situation now in Houston, I believe. So Zach Moss to replace him feels good. You've got some guys in that backfield like Chase Brown that help offset what Zach Moss does. So for me, this signing is only going to get a B+, because while I do feel like it fills in for Joe Mixon just fine, I am a little bit worried about what Zach Moss we will get. Will we get the Zach Moss that was a top 10 running back at the beginning of season filling in for Jonathan Taylor? Or will we get the Zach Moss from the second half of the season that did absolutely nothing when Jonathan Taylor missed time again? Aaron Jones is released by the Packers, and he decides to sign with the Minnesota Vikings on a 1-year deal. Now, I absolutely love this deal for Aaron Jones because he goes from having a backfield to himself from almost having a backfield to himself. Ty Chandler is still going to see some touches, but Aaron Jones is probably going to be the guy. I don't think the Minnesota Vikings would have brought in Aaron Jones if they truly felt like Ty Chandler was the guy. But I think they're going to complement each other just fine, and Aaron Jones is still going to see some of that big-time playability in an offense that's going to have weapons all over the place, and hopefully we'll have the quarterback position figured out by the time that week 1 gets here. So will the volume be super heavy for Aaron Jones? Maybe not, but I do think he can still have some pretty big weeks. This signing brings an A- for me. And last but not least, Marquise Brown to the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't think that there is a better fit in free agency than Brown to the Chiefs, because Brown never really was a wide receiver 1 option to me, but he performed like it at times. Even in these offenses like being in Baltimore and even this past couple of years in Arizona, where passing heavy wasn't really the structure of the offense, he still did some decent things. But now he's going to go to a pass-first team with the best quarterback in the NFL currently throwing him the football and plenty of weapons around him to take the pressure off. Marquise Brown is going to get a ton of one-on-one opportunities on the outside, and he's going to burn a ton of cornerbacks because those cornerback ones are going to be taking a look at Rashee Rice. And you're going to have Travis Kelce with a whole lot of people looking his way as well. And don't forget, you can run the ball really well with Isaiah Pacheco. Marquise Brown is a little bit more of a boom or bust type of player for me, a guy that might be a little bit better in best ball, but if he stays healthy, he's going to have some really big games. And for the Kansas City Chiefs, this is an A+ signing. He fits in with exactly what they need to do. He gives them the deep threat that they've been lacking without Tyreek Hill the last couple of years, and this feels like exactly what Kansas City needed to get their offense back on track. But let me know down in the comments below, who are your best signings? Who do you think fits best with their teams? Who are you most excited to see this year? And tell me your worst ones as well. Which ones made absolutely no sense to you? Make sure you turn on those bell notifications as well, because every time we drop new content, especially this time of the year with all the breaking news, you're going to want to know about it right away. And YouTube is going to recommend an older video of ours as well for you. Make sure you check that one out if you haven't seen it as of yet. But for now, I'm out of here, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.